already provided identification.
That doesn't answer my question.
I'm active duty Navy.
You getting people saluting you back there? You think that makes you exempt?
No, sir.
Turn around.
For what reason?
Don't argue with me.
He's not resisting.
Why are you grabbing?
Stop resisting.
He hasn't done anything.
I am
Hands behind your back.
Oh my God.
On a crowded afternoon inside Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, passengers watched in shock as a uniformed police officer slammed a decorated U.S. Navy SEAL to the terminal floor, right in front of families, travelers, and rolling cameras. Within hours, federal officials would intervene, and one officer's career would quietly begin to collapse. But what most people didn't realize was that this confrontation didn't start with suspicion. It started with attention, respect, and a police officer who couldn't seeing a black man receive it. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories exposing abuse of authority and real accountability, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this investigation. Security cameras inside Concourse N showed Senior Chief Malcolm Carraway moving calmly through the terminal just after 2:10 p.m., a carry-on bag in one hand, dress white Navy uniform pressed sharp enough to stand out against the rush of travelers. He had just landed from Norfolk following official Navy travel connected to a Pentagon briefing. Nearly 2 decades in naval special warfare had trained him to move quietly, efficiently, eyes forward, posture straight, aware of everything without appearing tense. People noticed immediately. A middle-aged man near a coffee stand nodded first. "Thank you for your service, Chief." Malcolm gave a polite smile. "Appreciate it, sir." A young mother guided her son closer. The boy raised a small, awkward salute. Malcolm returned it without hesitation. Phones came out. A couple asked for a quick photo. Airport noise continued around them. Boarding calls, rolling luggage, conversations. But for a moment, attention followed him down the concourse. 30 feet away, Officer Brett Muncy watched the entire exchange. He'd been assigned routine terminal patrol for most of the afternoon. Nothing urgent, nothing notable, just another shift standing near travelers who barely acknowledged his presence. His eyes stayed fixed on Malcolm. Another passenger shook the SEAL's hand. Muncy shifted his weight, jaw tightening. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. 2 teenagers walked past him without a glance, moving instead toward Malcolm. Muncy's expression hardened. Over his shoulder mic, dispatch chatter continued, but his focus never moved from the uniform, the medals, the attention, the quiet respect being handed out freely. He keyed his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, I'm observing an individual in military dress uniform drawing a crowd inside Concourse N." His tone was flat, controlled. "Need to verify authorization." There had been no complaint, no disturbance, no report. Still, Muncy started walking. Malcolm didn't notice him at first. He adjusted his bag and checked the overhead departure screen, preparing to head toward ground transportation. Muncy closed the distance quickly, stepping directly into his path, close enough to block movement. His eyes moved slowly over Malcolm's uniform before settling on his face. No greeting, no professionalism, just suspicion. "You," Muncy said sharply, "hold up a second." Travelers nearby slowed, sensing the shift instantly. Malcolm stopped calmly. "Is there a problem, officer?" Muncy's stare didn't soften. "Yeah, there might be." He glanced deliberately at the uniform again. "Because something about this doesn't look right to me." Passengers nearby began watching, and for the first time since landing, Malcolm realized this wasn't routine contact, and Officer Brett Muncy had already decided how this was going to end. Officer Brett Muncy didn't move out of the way. He stood directly in front of Senior Chief Malcolm Carraway, forcing him to stop in the middle of the concourse as travelers slowed around them. "Because something about this doesn't look right to me." Malcolm kept his posture straight, calm. controlled. "Can you clarify what doesn't look right, officer?" Muncy ignored the question. His eyes scanned the medals across Malcolm's chest, then back up to his face. "You active duty?" he asked. "Yes." "Stationed where?" "Virginia." "Doing what?" "I'm assigned to Naval Special Warfare." The answer was direct, no attitude, no hesitation. Muncy gave a short, humorless laugh. "Naval Special Warfare," he repeated. "That's so." A few passengers lingered nearby. A man who had thanked Malcolm earlier stayed within earshot. Malcolm nodded once. "Yes, sir." That word, sir, didn't soften Muncy. Instead, his tone sharpened. "You got ID on you?" "Yes." "Let me see it." Malcolm shifted his bag slowly, deliberately, keeping his movements visible. He retrieved his military identification and held it out. Muncy didn't take it immediately. He looked at Malcolm again, eyes narrowing. "You getting a lot of attention today," he said quietly. Malcolm didn't respond to that. Muncy finally snatched the ID from his hand. He studied it longer than necessary. "You expect people to just believe anything they see?" Muncy said, voice rising slightly. "Anybody can put on a uniform." Malcolm's expression remained steady. "With respect, officer, that's a regulated dress uniform." "Don't lecture me," Muncy snapped. Several heads turned. A woman standing near a charging station pulled out her phone. Muncy noticed, and his jaw tightened further. "You think this is a show, walking around like that?" Malcolm's voice stayed level. "I just exited my flight." "Uh-huh." Muncy stepped closer, too close, inside personal space, close enough that nearby travelers shifted uncomfortably. "What flight?" "From Norfolk." "What were you doing there?" "Official travel." "What kind of official travel?" "I'm not required to disclose operational details in a public terminal." That was measured, professional. Muncy's face hardened instantly. "There it is, that attitude." Malcolm blinked once. "I'm answering your questions." "No, you're dodging." He keyed his radio again. "Dispatch, I'm going to need confirmation on this ID, possible impersonation." There it was. The word hung in the air. Impersonation. A couple standing nearby exchanged looks. Malcolm spoke carefully. "Officer, impersonating military personnel is a federal offense. I would not be standing in a public airport if that were the case." Muncy stepped even closer. "Don't tell me what federal offenses are," he said, voice low and aggressive. "I enforce the law here." Malcolm held eye contact. "I understand." Muncy leaned in slightly. "You understand what?" he pressed. "That I'm being detained without cause." That sentence changed the atmosphere immediately. Muncy's shoulders squared. "You don't decide cause, I do." His hand moved toward Malcolm's arm, not to guide, to grab, and the crowd around them stopped pretending not to watch. Muncy's hand closed around Malcolm Carraway's arm. It wasn't a guiding touch, it was forceful, fingers tightening over the sleeve of his dress uniform as if control had already been decided. Malcolm immediately stopped moving. "Officer," he said calmly, "there's no need to grab me." Muncy didn't let go. "Yes, there is," he replied. "You're not cooperating." Several passengers nearby reacted at once. "He is cooperating," someone said from behind. Muncy ignored it. His grip tightened, pulling Malcolm slightly off balance as travelers slowed to watch openly now. Phones were raised without hesitation. Malcolm kept his voice even. "I've provided identification and answered your questions." Muncy stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not his hostility. "You think flashing a uniform makes you untouchable?" "That's not what I said." "Yeah," Muncie muttered. "That's exactly how you're acting." Malcolm glanced briefly toward the growing crowd, then back at the officer. "I'm asking you to release my arm." Instead, Muncie pulled harder. "Turn around." "For what reason?" That question snapped whatever restraint remained. "For resisting," Muncie barked, loudly enough for half the concourse to hear. Gasps spread through the terminal. "Oh my God! What are you doing?" Phones lifted higher. Malcolm did not fight back. He positioned his arms carefully beneath him, preventing injury, voice controlled even as pressure drove into his back. "I am complying," he said. Muncie dropped his knee onto Malcolm's shoulder blade. "Hands behind your back." "I am," Malcolm answered, breathing steady. Passengers protested openly now. "He didn't do anything! That man's military!" Muncie's face flushed, eyes darting briefly toward the crowd recording him. Instead of slowing down, his movements became rougher, pulling Malcolm's arm higher than necessary as handcuffs snapped closed. "You want attention?" Muncie said under his breath. "You got it now." Malcolm's white uniform was smeared against the terminal floor, one ribbon bar torn loose beside him. The entire concourse had gone quiet except for recording phones and distant boarding announcements continuing as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Then a voice cut through the crowd, sharp, alarmed. "Officer, do you realize who you just put on the ground?" Muncie looked up, and for the first time since initiating contact, uncertainty crossed his face. Muncie looked up from where he knelt on Malcolm Carraway. The voice had come from a woman pushing through the crowd, airport credentials clipped to her blazer. "Do you realize who you just put on the ground?" she repeated. Muncie's grip didn't loosen. "He's being detained for impersonation and resisting," Muncie said sharply. The woman stared at him. "That's Senior Chief Malcolm Carraway." Malcolm spoke evenly from the floor. "Ma'am, my ID is in his possession." Muncie shifted, clearly irritated. "Stay quiet." The woman didn't. "My name is Dana Van. I'm airport operations," she said firmly, "and you just tackled a uniformed Navy SEAL in front of half this terminal." Muncie stood up slowly, but kept a hand on Malcolm's cuffed wrists. "I don't care what uniform he's wearing. I care whether it's legitimate." "It is legitimate. I saw the ID." Muncie's jaw tightened. "Then he shouldn't have been evasive." Malcolm turned his head slightly. "I answered every question." "You refused to explain your travel," Muncie snapped. "I declined to discuss operational details in public." "That's not your call here." Dana looked directly at Muncie. "Officer, this is getting out of hand." Muncie ignored her and pulled Malcolm up roughly by the arm. The cuffs remained tight. Travelers were no longer whispering. They were openly filming. "You've embarrassed yourself enough," a man in the crowd said loudly. Muncie turned toward the voice. "Back up." His tone was aggressive, almost panicked now. Dana stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Dispatch just confirmed his credentials. They ran the ID." Muncie froze for half a second. "Confirmed how?" "Confirmed active duty, confirmed rank, confirmed assignment." The words landed heavy. Malcolm stood straight despite the cuffs. "Officer, I requested that you release my arm before you escalated." Muncie didn't respond. Instead, he keyed his radio. "Dispatch, clarify confirmation." The response came through clearly enough for several bystanders to hear. "ID verified, active duty Navy, no warrants, no flags." Silence settled around them. Muncie swallowed. But instead of stepping back, he doubled down. "He still resisted a lawful order," he said quickly, "pulled away during detention." Malcolm met his eyes. "I adjusted my footing when you shoved me." Muncie's voice hardened again, but the edge of certainty was gone. "You don't dictate how I conduct a stop." Dana exhaled sharply. "This stop never had cause." The crowd murmured agreement. Muncie scanned the faces, dozens of phones pointed directly at him. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. And then Muncie's radio crackled again. "Officer Muncie, stand by. Naval Command has been notified. They're requesting direct contact." The words seemed to pull the air out of the terminal. Muncie stared at the radio. "Naval Command?" he repeated. Dana's expression changed. "That means this just left your level," she said quietly. Malcolm remained still, cuffs tight against his wrists. And somewhere beyond the terminal walls, someone with far more authority was now involved. Muncie stared at the radio clipped to his shoulder like it had malfunctioned. Dispatch repeated, "Naval Command is requesting direct contact. They have a commanding officer on the line." The crowd hadn't moved. Phones were still up. Every second was being recorded. Dana Van stepped closer. "Officer, you need to uncuff him." Muncie didn't look at her. "I'm verifying first." Malcolm stood upright despite the restraints. "You've already verified." Muncie ignored him and pressed the transmit button. "This is Officer Muncie. Put them through." There was a short pause. Then a new voice came over the channel, controlled, authoritative. "This is Captain Renata Harwood, United States Navy. Who am I speaking with?" Muncie cleared his throat. "Officer Brett Muncie, Airport Patrol." "Officer Muncie," Harwood said evenly, "why is Senior Chief Malcolm Carraway in restraints?" Muncie hesitated for the first time since the encounter began. He was detained for impersonation and resisting. There was a brief silence on the line. "Impersonation of what?" Harwood asked. "Military personnel." Another pause, this one longer. "Officer," Harwood said carefully, "Senior Chief Carraway is a verified active duty member of Naval Special Warfare. His credentials were confirmed through your own dispatch. On what legal basis are you continuing to detain him?" The question landed hard. Muncie shifted his stance. He was uncooperative. In what way? He refused to explain his travel. "He is not obligated to disclose operational details to you in a public setting," Harwood responded. Her tone remained calm but firm. "Remove the restraints immediately." Muncie glanced at the crowd again. Dozens of phones. No support, no backup. Dana spoke quietly but clearly. "You're making this worse." Muncie exhaled sharply through his nose, then finally reached for the cuffs. The metal clicked open. Malcolm lowered his hand slowly, rubbing his wrists but keeping his posture straight. "Thank you," he said evenly, not to Muncie, but into the air, knowing the line was still open. Captain Harwood continued, voice steady through the speaker. "Senior Chief Carraway, are you injured?" "I'm fine, ma'am." "Understood. Officer Muncie, remain on scene. Do not leave the terminal. We are coordinating with airport administration and your department's command staff." Muncie stiffened. "That's not necessary." "It is," Harwood replied. The line went quiet. Dana stepped back, already dialing someone on her own phone. "This is going upstairs," she said under her breath. Malcolm bent down, picking up a ribbon bar that had come loose from his uniform. He held it in his palm for a second before securing it inside his pocket. He looked directly at Muncie. "I told you I was complying." Muncie didn't answer. His radio crackled again. "Officer Muncie, your watch commander is en route." The words were clinical, final. Around them, passengers were already uploading video, and for the first time since he made the decision to step into Malcolm Carraway's path, Officer Brett Muncie realized this wasn't ending quietly. Officer Brett Muncie remained standing in the middle of Concourse N as the atmosphere around him completely changed. Minutes earlier, he had controlled the scene. Now he was the one being watched. Airport security supervisors arrived first, quietly positioning themselves nearby. None spoke to Malcolm Carraway immediately. Their attention stayed on Muncie, on the officer whose actions had already spread across social media before command staff even reached the terminal. Dana Van returned, phone still in hand. "Your department's command just confirmed," she said flatly. "Internal Affairs is responding." Muncie shook his head slightly. This is being blown out of proportion. Malcolm stood a few feet away, adjusting the front of his dress uniform where fabric had creased during the takedown. He said nothing. Passengers continued filming. Within minutes, 2 senior supervisors from airport police entered the concourse. Their pace was fast but controlled. One of them approached Muncie directly. "Officer Muncie," the supervisor said, voice low, "step aside." Muncie hesitated. "Sir, he resisted." "Step aside, now." The authority in the command ended the argument. Muncie removed his hands from his belt and followed reluctantly as travelers watched him being guided away from the exact spot where he had forced Malcolm to the ground. Another supervisor approached Malcolm. "Senior Chief Carraway," he said, respectful tone replacing the hostility from earlier. "On behalf of airport police, I apologize for what occurred." Malcolm nodded once. "Understood." Behind them, word continued moving through official channels. Bodycam footage secured, witness statements collected, dispatch recordings preserved. By that evening, the videos filmed by passengers had reached national news outlets. Clips showed the moment Malcolm was tackled, the shouting, the accusations, and the visible lack of resistance. The narrative was impossible to control. Investigators later concluded that Officer Brett Muncie initiated contact without reasonable suspicion, escalated force unnecessarily, and continued detention after verification cleared Malcolm of wrongdoing. Prior complaints surfaced during review, patterns investigators couldn't ignore. Within weeks, Commander Ellis Becton of Internal Affairs finalized the outcome. Administrative leave became termination. Certification review followed. The career Muncie had built over nearly a decade ended with a signed notice and surrendered badge. Senior Chief Malcolm Carraway returned to duty shortly afterward. No press conference, no public anger, just quiet professionalism, the same discipline he maintained while lying handcuffed on an airport floor. The incident closed officially as misconduct, but for millions who watched the footage, the conclusion was simpler. Respect triggered resentment, bias triggered action, and accountability had finally followed. If this story kept you watching until the end, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more real documentary-style stories exposing abuse of authority and the moments accountability finally catches up. Drop your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned because the next case might be even more shocking.